Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us here today. I'm Carolina Alberna, CEO of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce based in Toronto, and would like to welcome you all to this very special BCCC ESG Excellence Series, ESG Performance Make It Happening, featuring a special guest speaker, Ms. Motoko Aizawa. Before I call Rafael Benke, CEO of the Proactiva and Chair of the BCCC ESG Committee for the opening remarks, I'd like to remind everyone that Ms. Aizawa will be available to answer a few questions after her presentation. So please don't be shy and send any questions you might have through the Q&A box located in the bottom of your screen. We have allowed attendees to upvote and answer questions to incentivize positive discussion. So feel free to add your comments and questions throughout the presentation. Without further ado, I would like to invite Rafael Benke to say a few words. Rafael, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Carolina, for the introduction. Very pleased to host this event today. I have with me Iman Kara, who is the Vice President of our ESG Committee at the Brazil-Canada Chamber, and Luciano Souza, who is also Vice Chair in the same committee. Iman with Brookfield, Luciano with Cescon Barrieu. And we've invited today Motoko Aizawa to be with us. I'd like to invite Iman and Luciano to come to the floor, as well as Motoko, so that we are all establishing our panel. And the way we will sequence our kickoff will be by Iman explaining a little bit what is this ESG committee and what we're doing, and how it is inserted in the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. And then Luciano will do the honor of introducing Motoko more formally. So with that, let me shift to Iman, and we get going. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. And as Rafael mentioned, welcome to the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce ESG Excellence Series today on ESG performance, making it happen. My name is Iman Kara, and I am the Vice Chair of the BCCC ESG Committee. And outside of my involvement with the BCCC, I work within ESG strategy and portfolio management at Brookfield Infrastructure Partners. So as many of you are aware, the BCCC was established in 1973 as a non-for-profit and independent business association with the primary objective of fostering stronger commercial relations between both Brazil and Canada. It's led by a volunteer board of directors and is comprised of renowned industry leaders and experts in conducting business between Brazil and Canada. And we play a vital role in linking these players in both the private and government sectors. And we work to facilitate dialogue between both parties and assist members in identifying key opportunities to expand activities and further business interests. So the ESG Committee was created to essentially advise the board of directors in all materials related to ESG and to add value to our members through high-level and strategic discussions, events, and activities, as well as generally contribute to the public debate, not only between Canada and Brazil, but internationally. The ESG, as many of you know, is now at the forefront of many discussions and is a mandatory discussion in boardrooms and management meetings for companies and investors all over the world. With sustainability always being considered a strategic decision, ESG has formalized this discussion on a more identified level. Our objective is to become the main point of discussion for Brazilian and Canadian companies on ESG matters and a vehicle to strengthen and connect bilateral and global practices and initiatives, brainstorm ideas, as well as network. Today, we are gathered here for the second event in our newly launched BCCC ESG Excellence Series. The series will focus on events and activities that will promote development and share of knowledge and expertise on ESG matters to educate a broader audience on current ESG trends. Today, we're going to be focusing on operationalizing ESG and to better understand the frameworks that surround it. So to better introduce this event, I'll pass it on to Luciano, my fellow vice chair, to further introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Iman. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Well, today BCCC is hosting a very exciting session. Well, let me introduce myself first. My name is Luciano. I'm partner at Cescon Barrieu and vice chair of the ESG Committee here at BCCC. And I would have the honor to introduce Mrs. Motoko Aizawa. As I mentioned, today the BCCC ESG Excellence Series session has the honor to have her as a speaker. So I would try to put in words her experience, because her experience is so vast that we need to actually to be very accurate to do this. So Ms. Motoko Aizawa is president of the Observatory for Sustainable Infrastructure. This organization is a research organization that aims to bridge the sustainability gap of mega infrastructure, investment and finance through data collection and policy research. Mrs. Motoko, she spent more than 2 decades at the World Bank Group in various capacities, including as a sustainability advisor to the World Bank Sustainable Development Network. So, but she is the principal author of the original IFC performance standard, which, as you may know, is the pillar of the ESG today. She also led the creation and implementation of the Equator principle. In both cases, Equator and IFC performance standard, she helped to these standards to incorporate the UN guiding principle on business and human rights. Mrs. Aizawa began her career as a business lawyer, doing due diligence and in M&A at Baker & McKenzie, and also a project finance at IFC Legal Department. After she left the World Bank, she was the managing director of the Institute for Human Rights in Business between 2014 and 2016. Currently, she is the chair of the District of Columbia Commission on Human Rights. Well, she has an amazing experience that we will share with us today. So it's an honor to have you here, Ms. Motoko. And Rafael, I return the floor to you.
Thank you, Iman and Luciano, for the excellent introduction. I think it sets very well the scene. And as you said, well, Luciano, is difficult to put in words, but definitely we are very pleased to have you on board, Motoko, to have you with us. And I had the privilege, Luciano, Iman, Carolina, and all the audience to be with Motoko in one of her endeavors, which was a part of the external review committee, or what we would call today probably an ESG committee of Royal Dutch Shell back in 2009, 2011. And we had these meetings about performance and about transparency of sustainability aspects for Shell globally, which was a very interesting effort if we think it was more than 10 years ago. So, and I think, you know, you just spoke of the performance standards, Luciano, 2006, the original ones, where we have a celebration right now of 15 years of these performance standards, and the name of it is a challenge in itself, because we're talking about performance standards, right? And this is the very name of our session, ESG performance. We are also celebrating the 10 years of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. I think it's also an opportunity to note the sad event of the passing away of Professor John Ruggie, who was a protagonist in developing the UN guiding principles. But I mentioned UN guiding principles because of this coincidence of discussing right now performance. discussing ESG performance. Two key pillars for ESG today, as you said very well, Luciano, the performance standards, the UN guiding principles, and Motoko has been involved with both of them throughout her career. As a matter of fact, she was involved in the insertion of the UN of the human rights component in the IFC performance standard. So I think we really have someone who we can learn a lot in this hour together. And I think we want to, in this panel, we would like Motoko to really tackle the aspect of performance, of really delivering, of really generating impact, be it in the prevention of risks, or be it, as you said the other day, of doing good, right? So we will reach that point, and I think this is the crux of the issue for companies and operators, both in Brazil, Canada, or worldwide, that already understood what is ESG, and we will talk about this in this session, but really need to understand the core, right? How do we make it happen? And I think this is what this session is about, and what we'll start touching on the session. Of course, this is a whole project if we really want to talk about it in depth, but this is what we want to learn from Motoko here. But I think that a good starting point, Motoko, would be why at that point did we have this result of the IFC performance standards, right? So why performance standards? What is the history behind it? What was the context that triggered this effort of establishing performance standards 15 years ago, right? So maybe we start from the beginning, Motoko, in that sense. You, as the lead author at that point, as Luciano reminded us, how did it come to life?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I am very grateful to BCCC for inviting me to speak about the IFC performance standards. I'm grateful for the role that Rafael played in facilitating this session. And Luciano, thank you so much for that kind introduction. So it's always difficult to get going. So where is the right starting point? You know, maybe many of you during the pandemic indulged on and fantasized about, if I were turning my significant life event into a novel or a movie, where do I start? What is the opening scene, right? And so I do have those fantasies about the performance standards. And I guess it's going to start in the middle of 1990s during the Thanksgiving holiday, the long weekend. IFC's General Counsel and Deputy General Counsel going into the office and poring over the project files of a project called the Pangue Hydroelectric Project in Chile, a 450 megawatt dam project, which was a state-of-the-art project at the time. But NGOs sent a letter to IFC saying there are all these environmental and social problems you need to look at. And so IFC had to appoint an independent external investigator panel to look into the problem. And I was a IFC project finance counsel at the time, but I was, I guess, appointed to sort of look after IFC and to make sure that IFC's reputation is somehow protected. Maybe you can show the first slide here. So you'll see that we had many adverse press coverage in the process, but one of which was the Financial Times saying this problem And the other one was the nation calling Wolfensohn, who was the president of the World Bank Group, Indian killer, right? This is the ultimate nightmare. You don't want your company's name featured like this in the FT, or your chief executive officer's name trashed like this. And so my role was to somehow figure out how to protect IFC in this process and to explain to the investigators what happened. Thank you for that slide. So basically, we did the investigatory process, and sadly, there were mistakes. There were mistakes in the environmental due diligence side, but more seriously on the social side, particularly. IFC forgot to do certain checks about the indigenous peoples, ended up inundating the reservoir of the dam before really doing a thorough inventory of the culture and property of the Pewenche people in the area. Did not anticipate that the real estate in the area would increase prices and push the Pewenche out. There were mistakes like that. And so sadly, IFC had to apologize, had to write its mea culpa. So the next slide, please. The mea culpa kind of looked like this. It was a publication. We also made a press announcement, and we said this, we learned our lesson. This is what happened. So this is more of a technical document, but at the corporate level, I think what happened is we realized we really were not sure what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to really apply at that time the World Bank safeguard policies. They were meant for the public sector, and somehow we were meant to adapt that for the private sector setup. But we only had a vague idea of what that really meant. So that was the corporate lesson. You have to be absolutely clear about the standards and the procedures that are applicable in your due diligence in order to have performance and results. So IFC then embarked on a series of improvements. It put in place an environmental and social review procedure. So this is the procedure of the due diligence. And this was to take place side by side with the investment due diligence. And in 2004, IFC embarked on the process of the performance standards. And I was the person who was responsible for designing the consultation process and creating a content that addressed all these problems for IFC. And I won't go into the consultation process. I just want to mention that we had 4 regional consultations, one of which took place in Rio de Janeiro. It was a lovely, lovely consultation and very informative. But in 2006, the board approved the performance standards. The board said, you know, we're really not sure what this is all about, but we trust the management to do the right thing. So come back in 5 years. And that was a very generous approval that the board gave us. Our clients said, we know how to do this, trust us. In fact, some of us, we want to do it ahead of the board approval. And that was a really important vote of confidence coming from Equator principals banks, coming from extractive industries. And so that really gave us the wind in our sails. Internally, our investment people said, we're not sure about this, but I guess we also trust the management, so we'll do this. But you know, if you are serious, please train our people as soon as possible. Right? So we actually started training staff even before board approval. And this then signaled to the board that everybody is very serious about this. So the board gave us the green light. We went ahead and fast forward, we did the 2012 5-year review. And that was the time when the UN Guiding Principles got incorporated. I was very close to John Ruggie. I did a lot of work with him and doing the back and forth. And so it got, the UNGPs got incorporated in the performance standards that got updated. Also, the idea of free, prior, informed consultation with the indigenous peoples and so on and so forth. So let me stop there. That was 2012. Basically, the standards have not been updated since.
Motoko, very, very interesting, because we see a major crisis with this hydroelectric project, a crisis that pops up in the media, exposing people, exposing the institution. The institution takes a very serious approach towards it, not only managing the crisis at its surface or just reacting very quickly through a journalistic approach, but really looking inside and really understanding structurally what is at stake. And I think this is very interesting about the work that you were mandated to do. So go there and see what is really happening. You perform with the team this due diligence. You notice a lot of gaps and severe gaps that end up triggering a whole process of establishing better management, better governance, better procedures, better material referencing in order to do a better job in the future. And I think another very interesting aspect of what you bring is that this process is not done in isolation, in a bubble called IFC, the opposite. You reach out to the community, to the specialized community, to interested parties, to stakeholders, to listen to them and develop this process. I imagine that this type of process, of course, not the first one, but definitely a very remarkable one, was also inspiring for many other processes to develop this kind of international referencing. But it really I think there is a lot of merit on how this crisis was treated in terms of substance instead of reviewing where our gaps are, and then how do I respond in the proportionate measure to the problem, right? So it's really a case, right? Maybe you want to comment a little bit on that and already explain a little bit what changes with these 2006 performance standards once they are in place. How did they serve? How did they operate? Maybe you can already jump into that.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. And thank you for commenting on the openness of IFC. I have to give credit to the vice president who was in charge at the time in investigating the matter, as well as the general counsel, both of whom were absolutely committed in finding out what went wrong and making it right. We also had a very unique president at the time, James Wolfenson. We were not used to dealing with NGOs. It was IFC was a fairly obscure organization at the time, and so we occasionally said, do we really have to engage with these NGOs? And to Wolfenson's credit, he said, go back, you need to engage with your enemy. He told us like that. And so we did. And it was really, the culture was such that we were encouraged to do what was necessary. And so the output of that, the performance standards, I just want to show you the next slide. This is something that perhaps many of you are already familiar with, but there are 8 performance standards. So anything from the process, the risk management process standard, labor, resource efficiency, but actually that's really about pollution, community issues, resettlement, biodiversity, indigenous people, and cultural heritage. So this is the mix of things, but you have to understand that this is part of the broader IFC sustainability framework. So there's an IFC sustainability policy, which governs what IFC has to do. disclosure policy, which governs what both IFC and the clients have to do. And then the performance standards were designed specifically to help the clients manage the environmental and social due diligence process, right? So we had different boxes applying to different parties, and that was to make very clear the different types of responsibilities. These responsibilities had to work together in parallel, but there were different responsibilities. And so what we wanted to do was to make sure the client really understood what they were supposed to do and what IFC was supposed to do to make sure that the clients were doing the right thing. So that's how it was supposed to work. And then the performance standards were supported by the guidance notes. So this is the detailed annotation of the performance standards. And then there are the World Bank Group Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines that I think many people, technical people, are very, very aware of. So these were the suite of documents that were part of the sustainability framework. And the performance standards are also known as the basis of the Equator Principles. In fact, the Equator Principles were put in place in 2003 with 10 banks. Right. And so the banks were a very crucial group of stakeholders. They understood how to make this work and they understood what was needed. And so the feedback from them was extremely important, but it was their insight that also contributed to the shape of the performance standards. And then eventually the standards were shared by shared with multiple institutions and companies globally. So thank you for the slides. So I just want to give you a sense of who they are. So in addition to 124 Equator Principles financial institutions that are spread over 37 countries, 37, I believe, export credit agencies under the OECD also apply the performance standards. Needless to say, the World Bank Group, their standards and frameworks are inspired by the performance standards. Other multilateral development institutions, the European Development Finance institutions, these are the European bilaterals, they also apply the performance standards. And also many multinational companies do that. But the interesting thing that I also want to tell you is that governments also embrace the performance standards. And so I want to show you a picture, interesting picture from about 2007 and onwards. So this is a series of photos taken in China. In 2007, we visited China and we said, we have this performance standards. And you just announced that you are serious about your green credit policy. Can we collaborate? And when we went to visit the environmental agency and the China Banking Regulatory Commission, they said, where were you? We have been waiting for you. And so from then we had this long collaboration with China to help China create guidelines for Chinese banks to incorporate principles of the Equator Principles in their operations. And so this is one of my career highlights, and I wanted to share the pictures with you. But also, it's not just China, right? In the United States, for example, the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the US TDA, that's Trade and Development Association, they also apply the performance standards and so on and so forth. So I think what this means is that the more people use the performance standards, the easier your due diligence process becomes, right? There is a level playing field. Everybody's doing more or less the same thing. The process is more predictable. And that hopefully eliminates free riders. So that is the benefit. And also I observe that the performance standards are transitioning from a soft instrument, soft law instrument, to a hard hard law instrument, right? By being written into regulations. And so I think that is the relevance of the performance standards today.
Motoko, it's fantastic, you know, how you transitioned and brought this to the big picture, and recalled, actually reminded us of early efforts of, you know, the genesis of the Equator principles, and this, you said the highlight in your career in this meeting in China, but I think it's a highlight for the history of sustainable finance and ESG. It's really a milestone there in terms of, I believe it was 2006, 2008, 7, you were there. I didn't quite see in the picture, but it's very early stages, right? It's very interesting. And I want to go back to this more macro aspect, but before, if we can go one step back and go back to the slide, Mariana, if you could, where we have the performance standards, those boxes, and if you know, abusing of your connection to the development of these. Tell us a little bit, Motoko, about the developing of the process, right? How did you get to each one of those standards and guidelines on how was the involvement of experts? How did you do the onboarding of these experts, or did the IFC did all of it alone? How did you operate this to come to this excellent work of the performance standards, right?
Thank you for asking that question. I see that there's a tiny lag in my video. I hope that that's not distracting to you. Sorry about that. So all of this work was done in-house. The reason being that this was not just a standard shift, but also a culture shift. And so in order to be credible to our investment colleagues, our management, our board, and also our external constituencies, we had to make sure that we could demonstrate that we knew what we were doing. Sometimes we didn't, but we still had to demonstrate that we have a roadmap for getting there. So all of this work was done in-house, and it was sometimes it was harder to bring internal constituencies along than external, right? I think everybody knows the process of culture change, that you have to keep your internal constituencies very, very close. And so I had a model of corporate change that I used, which unfortunately I don't have a slide for that, but it's a spiral model where you keep on going round and round, but touching different base, and eventually you get to the core of the spiral. So I did have a very distinct mental model in mind, and we did consultations, as I said, regional consultations, online consultations, expert consultations, industry consultations, consultations with the World Bank, lots of different consultations. And the key was to also make clear what the consultation processes were in order for everybody to be able to anticipate what's going to happen next. And as I say, we didn't always know, we couldn't always anticipate what's next, but we did our best. So it's a very interesting process. Some people found it very disconcerting that it wasn't about the management saying, follow us, you know, I lead you, we follow us, right? This was about, let's make this thing together. And if we make this thing together, what does it look like? So that's what the process was. Does that answer your question, Rafael?
It does very much. I think you brought a little more context to how this was developed, and I think this is very, very interesting to register. And I think now we can jump again back to today 15 years after a review of it in the middle of this period. How do you see its relevance today and its effectiveness today for the current world, for the world of ESG, where ESG is really becoming central in the convergence of various stakeholders, many of them who have been involved for a long time, but now it really seems that not only we're seeing this shift from soft law, as you said, to hard law, but really to something accessory towards something that is really at the forefront and center of good management, of good business, right? So maybe you can tell us what is your feeling about what is the place of performance standards in the current world.
Yes, that is the big question, and I guess it's still evolving. 15 years ago, I don't think I could have predicted that what the performance standards would be doing, a decade and a half hence. And so I'm pleased to note they are still relevant. I was recently part of the external advisory group that advised the Inter-American Development Bank's design of the environmental and social framework. And they were very, very clear. They want to model their performance standards after IFC. So that's one example. But again, and I should also say 124 Equator banks are still applying the performance standards. There are 6 Brazilian banks that are EPFIs, and so they are still grappling with the performance standards, right? And that is a good thing. But the new standards have new things in it, going beyond the IFC performance standards. So IDB's environmental and social framework has a new standard, for example, on gender. And that's absolutely right and timely and crucial. So there are developments that go beyond the performance standards. And coming back to today's main theme on ESG, this is very relevant, especially in capital markets, right? Where there is a strong recognition that business as usual is not going to get us to sustainable development that we conceptualized in 1992 in Brazil. That's almost 30 years ago. And we're still, this dream of sustainable development is still elusive. So I think the realization is that we must very deliberately allocate capital towards environmental and socially beneficial business activities. And maybe that has to be forced in order for sustainable development to become a reality. So today we see new instruments, green bonds, sustainability bonds, SDG investments, SDG funds, different types of financial instruments, and that's very welcome. And with that, I think there's a growing need and realization that we need to have a very clear understanding of impacts from these investments, both positive and negative, right? So the performance standards, I think, do a very good job of spelling out what the negatives are. But what's missing, I think, really is the positive side. And yes, there are some people who say applying the performance standards in and of itself is a positive. But what I'm talking about is deliberately designing products, services, initiatives that directly benefit society, the environment. And so there's a real interest in better articulating what these positive impacts of investments are. And so, for example, the European taxonomy work that is ongoing, which is a massive piece of work, basically what that is doing is to show that people have to have a common agreement of what sustainability means, what positive and significant contribution is. And with that, companies that doing well can make themselves available for sustainable finance. So that is the road to sustainable finance, that well-performing companies should be able to articulate their significant contribution to society and have access to funding. And the slide that you see right now is a slide entitled Taxomania. This is because many jurisdictions beyond the European Union have been inspired by what's happening in Europe and are thinking about all sorts of different taxonomy initiatives. I was involved with a project in Malaysia that looked at taxonomy. So this is very exciting and also a little confusing because there are different standards that are going to come on board. But the point is this, that the taxonomy work must be underpinned by an open and transparent framework, disclosure framework, sustainability reporting framework. And of course, there is that new reporting framework called TFCD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So these are the tools that underpin the effectiveness of the taxonomy. And these disclosure regimes, many of these are now regulated and mandated. Yeah, in some other jurisdictions, they are encouraged. But I think what we're seeing is some teeth in these regulations. And with teeth, the landscape becomes more even and there'll be fewer free riders, and companies won't be able to pick and choose what they want to report on. They must report on all the impacts. And here, it's not just the impacts on the related to the performance standards, but everything, right? That relates to environmental, social, and governance dimensions. So that's the vision of the future. And so I see this, just to conclude, right? I see this new enthusiasm on ESG in the context of governments, cities, municipalities wanting to recover from this COVID crisis as fast as possible and to build back better, right? And I think there is a growing understanding and enthusiasm that ESG plays a key part in this growing building back better. And so in order to do this, there needs to be a financial recovery, economic recovery, and ESG will play a key part in that kind of recovery, helping society be more resilient for future crises. So that is my vision and also my hope. Thank you.
That's great, Motoko, the way you put it, and very inspirational. And I think there is an interesting question from the audience. André Luiz brought a very crucial question, I think, for all the operators. Of course, when someone like you, who has had all these years of experience from the genesis of a lot of what is there today, you bring a lot of clarity and peace to these multiple initiatives and references and so on. I think the map you bring regarding taxonomy is interesting, and André Luiz's question goes to the point of the many frameworks that are out there, right? And how confusing they can get, and then how do we really touch the bottom line? In other words, if we're talking about performance and going to the topic, the key topic of our event, ESG performance, if we're talking KPIs, how do operators choose what they use as a reference? So it may seem a little confusing. So this is his question, right? About so how do I improve my performance? Can these KPIs, these performance standards, and other standards be effective? And then what reference do I choose?
Yes, that is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it, Rafael? It's a very messy landscape. It's exciting, but very messy. And there is no silver bullet. There isn't a single fix. I think that companies need to be very, very strategic, understanding their strengths of their business and understanding how to use that strength towards something that's beneficial to the society, to the environment. And for that, you don't really need standards in a way. You just need inspiration, right? You need to know what your stakeholders are doing and saying. So in a way, I think a very strategic approach that's supported by management, the board, that is very important. It's also very useful to consult your stakeholders, the NGOs, the Chamber of Commerce like BCCC. They are a very important source of information in terms of what others are doing, what they would like to see others do. So by consulting and understanding where the movement is going, you could potentially consolidate the movement as well. And this happens to this needs to happen at the business level, at the industry or sector level, at the business association level, country, region, and global. It's a big, big thing that needs to happen. I do a lot of work with the United Nations, different parts of that organization that are working on sustainable infrastructure. And I always say, make sure you simplify what you put forward, make sure that they resonate with other things that you're doing, make sure that they resonate with industry standards, just so that we have the core principles that are common, right? Ultimately, it's about that. We all implement these things in a different way. That's inevitable. But we have to be guided by our core principles. We have to be able to explain to our stakeholders, what does it look like for us to be able to implement our core principles, which happen to be common with the global core principles. So it's these different interactions at different level. But I think the key is for companies to be very, very clear what their strengths are and what they can do and what they can sustain. Because if they cannot sustain it, forget it, right? This is not charity. This is something that you do as part of your core business. And so being very strategic about it, having a very long-term vision about it, I think that's very important.
It's a very, very interesting how you approach it, Motoko. I think in part answers some other questions we're having. I think Patricia is asking about specifically about diversity, inclusion. You made a reference, for instance, to the IDB developments in that area as an authoritative reference regarding this specific aspect. We had Cicero here asking about how you see the convergence or maybe the fusion or integration of these various frameworks, the IFC performance standards with the recent ISO developments, and how this connects to Equator principle. I think we're, as you said it very well, we see these interconnections for a long time already being connected and reinforcing aspects to the extent possible. You touched on a very important point, which is the sectoral dimension, and also I would add the territorial dimension. So there is some common ground that we are able to use in a universal way, but some others need to be specific so that they are effective. And this is we are noticing more and more. I think there is very good work if you think of forestry, FSC, canopy. If you think of mining, the mining principles and other bodies, and how this is then bringing the uniqueness, the specificities, so that we can respond to ESG dimensions related to that. And the same for the landscape, the territorial aspect of it. And I'm seeing here Luciano Moesa. She's the representative of South America, so to say, in the TNFD effort. So we're seeing the TCFD with a lot of progress in that area for that specific matter, and now the TNFD progress and so on. So and when we talk about the doing good and the change of paradigm and bring a taxonomy to the discussion, the taxonomy, I think we could also say that is not one size fits all. We cannot just import the EU taxonomy and be the same taxonomy for all countries. Maybe on that point, you could also tackle, since you just participated in an effort in Malaysia, I believe you just said, how can we do a single taxonomy for everyone, or how does that work?
Well, Rafael, that's a tough question. So I'm only going to be able to nibble at some of the questions, perhaps. But I just want to come back to the role of sectors, right? And emphasize the importance of the financial sector. So that Equator Principles financial institutions finance roughly 70% of the emerging markets project finance projects. So that is a big chunk of projects, mostly in infrastructure. What this means is that if an Equator bank is in a financial syndicate, basically the Equator Principles bind that whole syndicate, because that's probably the highest standard. And so the due diligence will be done in accordance with the Equator Principles. Everybody will benefit. There will be just one single set of due diligence that perhaps others can take advantage of. But whatever the financial sector says are the requirements that has a tremendous bearing on their clients, their borrowers. And now with stock exchanges also adopting these taxonomies, their disclosure rules, and so on and so forth, they can have a instantaneous influence on listed companies in that particular jurisdiction. And so there's a lot of push from the financial sector, not just the debt side, not just the project finance side, but now also from the equity side. And I think that if the equity side persists, that will be a game changer. Equator Principles never went beyond project finance, right? Well, a little bit on corporate finance, but so I think that is something to keep an eye on. But all these different types of regimes, disclosure regimes, standards, how to reconcile that? I think it's I don't want to repeat what I said already. I think collaboration is key. Collective action is key. And government agencies can play a very significant leadership role in steering that domestic conversation. I remember Brazil had a Protocol Verde. Is that right? It right. Still has it, yeah. I don't know where that conversation went. I haven't kept up to date, but you know, that is a very important initiative, I would think. Also, I don't know what kind of work. I would be very interested in learning more about the ESG work that this Chamber of Commerce is doing, but frequently initiatives come up at the chamber level. and then spill over into non-member companies. You know, having that little convergence and push from the core of the industry outward, that's really, really helpful. And then coming back to taxonomy, why wouldn't Brazil, for example, have its own set of taxonomy, say, on Amazon, right? That's something that's unique to Brazil. You are very qualified to tackle that, while you are also taking inspiration from other taxonomy work. But the taxonomy has to work in the local context just as much as the global context. And so why wouldn't Brazil do that? It's just a question that I have. And it's an opportunity, for example, for people who might be interested.
That's very, very interesting, Motoko. I think you brought forward important elements, and I think you're able to tackle some of the questions. And there is one here that is very specific, but I think it's interesting that you shed light on Freddie's question, asking if the ESG standards are the result of an evolving process based on ISO, on ISO, as we say in Brazil. ISO 14,000, 26,000, if you see the ESG as an evolution of that.
Thank you. Well, ISO 26,000 is common with other standards that embrace the UN guiding principles, right? And 14,000 series have been embraced by many companies, and some are certified, but some others are already doing that work almost unconsciously without thinking about it and without certification, perhaps, because the process requirements are so key to making ESG work for a company context. So in that sense, the core principles of ISO standards are also common with many other things, including the performance standards. I think some companies are far more involved in the ISO process than others, and I think that is fine. Some countries are far more involved in the ISO process than others. That is fine. The key is to make sure that people understand what are driving these standards and what are the core principles.
Thank you, Motoko. We are coming to very soon to a close of our session, and I wanted to reserve a couple of minutes now before you go to your final comments, Motoko, really to talk about performance, right? And maybe you could recall a bit the aftermath of the 2006 performance standard establishment, and how you view, the effectiveness of that. If you think that that you could experience in those projects you were involved effectively a better performance, right? And then throughout your life thinking of the challenge of different organizations you've observed seeking better performance in the social, environmental, and governance dimensions. How frustrating is that, or what can we say or give as an advice for effective performance to really make it happen? Let's start with the most evident one, which is really the prevention of risk, really to try to reduce the risk towards social, environmental, governance factors, and mitigate impact of these risks. So how do we bring effectively better performance? Are these standards, is ESG really coming to that after this 15 years since you helped putting one of the pillars of ESG today? How do we tackle that?
So that is the holy grail of not just the performance standards, but all the different initiatives that set the parameters of performance on environmental and social and governance sustainability. You could go at it perhaps in a couple of ways. There are attempts to measure the environmental and social impacts through financial impacts, right? So the bottom line can be affected by environmental and social performance and conduct, both positively, but frequently, very frequently, negatively, right? So there are valuation tools. For example, IFC has such a valuation tool that measures the cost of environmental and social activities and calculate that in financial terms and in net present value terms, and for executives to understand it's worth spending that money because here are the potential consequences if you did not do the risk management. So, and then there are other integrated sustainability reporting initiatives that try to not just report on a financial side and the environmental and social side separately, but to try to bring these two together. So there are various integrated approaches that have been tried. They are technical. I think they are part of the solution, but I don't think that's the only thing that's out there, right? Again, I think it's a conversation that a company has to have with its management, staff, board, its stakeholders about what it is that it should be doing and what it is that it could do to add value. So risk management is a part of value addition. But today we need to go beyond and to have that conversation, to have that effective stakeholder engagement, and to also consult your industry peer and to understand what are they seeing as true impact. That is very important, I think. Also, there are many impact measurement tools, right, that are coming up from the impact investment side, coming up from the taxonomy side. Yes, there are tools. So to me, it's a combination of using technical tools and evaluation tools and so on and so forth, and this engagement part. I am a total believer in the value of engagement. If your stakeholders say you're not doing anything valuable, even though your valuation and all these other tools tell you you're doing great, forget about it, right? So you have to have both, I think, in order to understand your impact. If you can afford it, you should carry out an evaluation of your conduct. Of course, large institutions can afford to do things like this. Seeing that we're a little past 11, Rafael, should I wrap up or
yes,
would you like
yes.
to?
Well, excellent input that you just gave, and very pragmatic one. The performance is not only what you are seeing as performance, but also how your performance is being seen by your stakeholders, and if I may dare, Motoko, your rights holders. And but with that, let's definitely go to some of your closing remarks, and I would be ready for an extra hour, but we'll plan for next time. Please your closing remarks, Motoko.
Thank you. I will be brief. Thank you so much. You gave me an opportunity to say a lot. I just want to make one point on the importance of social impacts. Right? We get carried away sometimes with the green investments, sustainable investments. We forget the human dimension of these investments. And there is no such thing as sustainable investment without the human dimension being appropriately taken into account. I also recognize environmental impacts invariably are human rights impacts. So addressing the environment will benefit human rights, but you also have to look at what are the possibilities of creating negative human rights impacts from a corporate activity. And in this sense, I just want to point out something that perhaps people are not very aware of, which is that the performance standards require the process of environmental and social impact assessment, right? And this impact assessment must not only look at impacts that are described in the performance standards. The assessment process must describe all relevant environmental and social impacts. So say a company has a very strong program on slave labor or child labor. They say, we want to focus on this. But you also need to figure out if you're moving people to make the land appropriate for the project, you have to think about the resettlement policy. If you're impacting the indigenous peoples, you have to think about the indigenous peoples policy. If there are rights of women and children violated, for example, by construction workers, as it happens in many jurisdictions, that's not covered in the performance standards, but the environmental and social impact assessment must look at that. And so I'm proud of this aspect of the performance standards, that it is very thorough. And it's a difficult thing. In a way, it's a goal, high goal that keeps on eluding us, right? And we won't be perfect always, but we have to try. And this is what the performance standards hopefully will inspire others to do. So in the context of what's happening in the world, the performance standards are a building block towards the next step of looking at both positive and negative impacts. And so for that reason, they remain relevant, but there are also new things that are coming up. And the new things will also be explicitly incorporating social dimensions. For example, the European Union is looking at the social dimension of the taxonomy. There's a lot of work going on in that respect. So my final word as a human rights advocate is, let us make sure in our due diligence we don't forget the human rights and the human dimensions in what we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Motoko. With that, we end for now this conversation with Motoko. We really look forward to the next opportunity. With that, we open spring in the southern hemisphere, and the leaves are still beautiful in the northern hemisphere. Carol, Mariana, Iman, if I hear correctly. But Motoko, thank you immensely for your time, for the wealth of knowledge you shared with us. It was, I think, for all of us who are practitioners in this area, to have the history of it, the context you brought forward, the pragmatic view that you brought to the discussions is really fantastic. So thank you very much. And again, Luciano, Iman, thank you for your support, participation, encouragement for this session to take place. And let me shift to Carolina for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Motoko, for an inspiring conversation. Learned so much with both of you today. I would like to thank everyone for joining us here today. I hope you found this conversation very worthwhile, the same way that we did. And if you want to learn more about the work that the Chamber is doing in the ESG, with the ESG movement and the work of the committee and how the Chamber can support your company, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. Finally, I would like to thank our annual sponsors, Vale, Export Development Canada, Cescon Barrieu, Brookfield, Lundin Mining, and TMX Group for the partnership. And I appreciate everyone again, for being here with us today. Stay safe, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you very much, Motoko. It was an honor to have you here with us. Thank you.